Good morning, Senator Harkin and members of the committee. Today I will just summarize 3 basic points in my written testimony that will document the need for the Employment Non-Discrimination Act. My first point is that employment discrimination against lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender Americans, whom I'll just call LGBT Americans, occurs in workplaces all across the country. Jacqueline Gill was a temporary instructor at a community college in Texas. She's also a lesbian. When permanent jobs opened up in 2010, she was not allowed to interview for those positions, even though she'd received praise from students, from her colleagues, and from parents of her students. Several of her colleagues, who were equally qualified or actually less qualified, were allowed to interview and were hired, whereas Mrs. Gill was not. She was also harassed because of her sexual orientation. Her supervisor told her at one point that Texas and Tarrant County do not like homosexuals. Vandy Beth Glenn was fired in 2007 from her job with the Georgia General Assembly because she is transgender. Before he fired her, Glenn's direct supervisor told her that her gender expression was unnatural and unsettling, and he later fired her on the grounds that her gender transition was inappropriate and would make other workers there feel uncomfortable. Ronald Crump is a gay man who was a Los Angeles Police Department sergeant. His supervisor verbally harassed him on a number of occasions because Crump is gay, comparing him to one of the women in the department, quote, minus the heels, and other derogatory comments. When Crump filed an internal complaint, he was transferred from a very prestigious position to a much less favorable one. We now have decades of social science research that tell us that those stories, which are just a sample of many, are repeated in workplaces all across America. In 2008, the General Social Survey found that 42% of lesbian, gay, and bisexual people had experienced employment discrimination because of their sexual orientation at some point in their lives, and 27% of those had actually experienced that just in the last 5 years, so it's common and it's recent. In the largest survey of transgender people to date, 47% of respondents had experienced discrimination in hiring, in promotion, or in job retention. In 2008, my colleagues and I studied the complaints filed by LGBT people in the states that outlaw sexual orientation discrimination. I'll just say the numbers of those complaints were actually relatively small compared to the overall numbers of complaints filed at those state agencies each year. But when we adjusted those counts to take into account the different population sizes of the protected groups, what we found was that lesbian, gay, and bisexual people file complaints at roughly the same rate that women and people of color do, suggesting that discrimination is roughly similar in terms of its frequency. 2 recent studies actually provide a very vivid picture of discrimination. Sociologist Andres Tilschik sent out pairs of resumes of recent college graduates for job openings for white-collar entry-level positions in 7 different states. He coded one of the resumes as gay by saying that this person had been the treasurer of the campus gay organization, and the other one he left as just a volunteer position at some other non-gay organization. He sent them both out to the employers, and the differential treatment of the gay applicants was very clear. To just give you a perspective on that, to get an interview for a job, a gay applicant had to apply for 14 jobs, whereas the heterosexual applicant only had to apply for 9 jobs to get an interview. Another study sent actual applicants, one transgender and one non-transgender, to apply for 24 jobs in the retail sector in New York City. In half of those jobs, 12 out of 24, half of those employers, the non-transgender applicant actually got a job offer. And only 2 of those 24 employers did the transgender applicant receive a job offer, and that's a very high degree of discrimination. 2 decades of research also suggest that this kind of discrimination has important economic harms, in particular for gay and bisexual men. Depending on the study, gay and bisexual men earn from 10% to 33% less than similarly qualified heterosexual men, most likely because of discrimination. Transgender people also have very low incomes. The National Transgender Survey found that 15% of their respondents had incomes under $10,000 per year. That's a very low income, 15% of the transgender respondents, whereas in the population as a whole, it's only about 4% with such low incomes. The last thing I'll say about the evidence of discrimination is that it includes both private sector employees and employees of state and local governments. My Williams Institute colleagues have found exactly the same widespread and persistent pattern of discrimination against LGBT people who work for state governments as we see for private sector employers. My next 2 points I'll make much more briefly. The second one is that non-discrimination laws, like ENDA, are likely to reduce discrimination. Some of this recent research suggests that both the pay gaps shrink and the differential treatment of gay applicants is less in states that have such laws. So that makes me think that ENDA could play a very important role in reducing that discrimination as well. And my third and last point that I know you'll hear more about is that the evidence shows that employers would also benefit if ENDA were passed. It's not just the LGBT employees. We've long known that businesses are most successful when they recruit, hire, and retain employees based on what they can do, not who they are, as Senator Harkin mentioned. That's one reason why 86% of Fortune 500 companies have bans on sexual orientation discrimination, and half of the Fortune 500 now have a policy of non-discrimination based on gender identity. And studies also suggest that ENDA will lead to healthier and more productive workers if they have legal protection from discrimination. So just to sum up very briefly, the research overwhelmingly demonstrates both that the Employment Non-Discrimination Act is necessary in order to fight discrimination and would benefit both employees and employers. Thank you.